I once had to open up for Motorhead because, it's as bad as it sounds.
Live from the Willie Nelson and Friends Museum Showcase in Nashville, Tennessee. It's Music is Funny. Musicians talking to comedians about music and comedy. With your hosts, Raelyn Nelson and Jonathan Bright.
I'm still smoking, I'm so high, I keep toking, I'm drunk, but I'm still drinking too.
Welcome back to Music is Funny. I'm Raelyn Nelson.
And I'm Jonathan Bright from the Raelyn Nelson Band, back with another ridiculous and unnecessary intro. Today we got a true rocker, one of my favorites, the Daddy Man.
Earl Skakel. Hi, Earl. I'm Raelyn.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Hey, how are you?
We actually had some camera issues just before.
Yeah, so
like 2 minutes ago, too.
we're synced up.
This is JB, my co-host and friend and guitar player.
Hello, how are you?
Nice to meet you, man. Thanks for doing this.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Okay, so we start every podcast by asking, what's the first music you remember loving as a kid?
Oh, without a doubt, Kiss. I'm 53, so in the 70s, I think people kind of forget how big Kiss was. They were like the Beatles of the mid to late 70s in America. Like, I don't think there's ever been a group. There's certainly been groups who sold more records, but at that time, I don't think there's ever been a group that was more well known. Like, even if you didn't like Kiss, you knew it was Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter. Like, they were so. Just the fact that they released 4 solo albums on the same day, I don't think you'll ever see a band do that.
Yeah, I'm a year older than
tell
you.
him how old you are?
I'm a year older, but same deal. At that age when you're young, and it's kind of rock and roll music, and seems a little rebellious, and then they're blowing shit up, and all the album covers and the magazines and stuff, they were gigantic.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain to people who are, say, 20, 25, 35, where today a band like, say, Metallica is gigantic. But, a lot of people couldn't name the members. So with Kiss and their label mates, actually, for a brief period, the Village People, which is funny to say now, but they were huge in the late 70s. So they were maybe the second group that I was just fascinated by, because no one really dressed like them. And I, at the time, didn't know they were kind of playing gay stereotypes. I learned that a little later on in life, but, it's funny that they were both on the same record label.
And that label's storied too. Casablanca, they were basically, I think they've just ran in the red the entire time. Cocaine for lunch parties, just complete 70s record label that just didn't make any money whatsoever and sold a lot of records.
Yeah, I read their book. I think it's called Rock and Roll All Night, Party Every Day. And just an amazing. And they also had, maybe Diana Ross. They had another huge act, Donna Summer. I'm sorry.
There it is. Yep.
So to have those 3 acts in the late 70s and to not make money is a lot of money going up people's noses, because those were probably the 3 most popular acts in, say, 78.
Yeah, for sure. They were raking it in, and it's funny because it was mostly disco, or all disco except for Kiss. And I guess they just saw the costumes and were like, well, we can do something with this too.
Well, I mean, I think Kiss is the only band that they had like a 6 or 7 straight album run where each album was different musically. Like 79, I think they saw the writing on the wall with disco being big, certainly with the Village People in their house. And Dynasty is basically a disco album. Because I think Paul Stanley was very friendly with Desmond Child, who is like the king of power pop. That guy could write a hit song for the 3 of us if he was he's really, how he isn't talked about more as a songwriter amongst the general public, I don't understand because I bought his box set. Probably the only straight guy in West Hollywood with Desmond Child's box set. And he's written for Aerosmith, Kiss, Ricky Martin, all these interesting Ratt, anyone. Bon Jovi, of course, is probably what he's most known for. But then in 1980, I think the Kiss management camp saw a band like the Cars being popular, who I love. So they put out a album that sounds like a Cars album with keyboards and backing vocals. And then I think Pink Floyd put out The Wall, and then Kiss put out their concept album. And then I think they saw like bands like Judas Priest coming on. So they put out Creatures of the Night, which is basically a Judas Priest album. And then I don't think I've ever seen a band do that.
Yeah, they had no problems catering to the market at one point. Certainly, I jumped ship right about Dynasty, and once they took the makeup off stuff, they kind of lost me with that. But to your point, they were a hair band at one point when that was popular. They took the makeup off and put the hair up high, and nobody looked worse than Gene Simmons doing glam.
They should put out a hip hop album.
Oh, they would. Trust me. I guarantee you Gene has thought about it. And it's funny you say that, because I know that Aerosmith and Run DMC get credit for like the first rap rock song with Walk This Way, but Kiss on the album Lick It Up, they did a song called All Hell's Breaking Loose. And listen to it, because it's Paul rapping at the beginning of the song, and I can say the rap word for word because I've listened. I loved Kiss in the glam era because they had a guitar player by the name of Vinnie Vincent who was so insane that he got kicked out of the Vinnie Vincent Invasion.
It's probably because he quit showing up to gigs.
I mean, it's his band. And of course, that band later became Slaughter. But Kiss is that era of Kiss is pretty divisive from, say, 83 to maybe 90, which is when they contacted Desmond Child again. And, they saw Bon Jovi being huge, and, hey, I'm sure they were like, hey, can you write us an album basically that would be our Slippery When Wet? And they did an album called Crazy Nights, which I love, but most hardcore Kiss fans like you who left at, say, 79 are like, that album sucks.
And it's funny when I meet younger people that, like, I know a few huge Kiss fans that are probably 5 or 6 years younger than me, and they discovered them without the makeup. It was the first time they saw them, and then they went back, and found out about all the other stuff, which seems hilarious to me.
Well, I mean, without the makeup, they were actually never more a better band, because they were, at that time, and I'm dating myself by mentioning all these players, in the 83 to, say, 88 era, the popular guitar players, obviously led by Van Halen, were like Jake E. Lee and George Lynch and Warren DeMartini, and Kiss. I think Gene and Paul were probably like, hey, we need our version of that. So they brought in Vinny, and then Bruce Kulick, and a guy by the name of Mark St. John, who was only with them for 9 months. But I always found it funny that they made fun of, Gene and Paul made fun of Mark St. John, said he played like a bumblebee and could never play the same song twice. But that's what was popular at the time, was, the shredding and all that. And then Kiss put out, I think in 1994, one of my favorite grunge albums, Carnival of Souls. So they're all over the place.
Yeah, it's hilarious. And a lot of those guitar players you mentioned were playing on their records back when Ace was still in the band. They just didn't let anybody know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was totally clueless to ghost musicians until I dated the co-manager of Motorhead for 6 years. And she gave me a crash course of, oh, he's not really on the album. I'm like, what are you talking about? Who is? Oh, they call them session musicians, like Steve Lukather, and I mean, he's more than a session musician, but like, you know, but where's his name on the album? Oh, they just have a private deal. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Los Angeles, right? I mean, you're our first person of royalty that we've had on. You certainly have royalty on the podcast. So
Thank you.
I mean, other than me. Yeah.
other than Raelyn, I suppose.
Oh, of course, Raelyn's like the queen, but
Right.
you know.
Yeah. I don't know what's better, the Nelsons or the Kennedys. What do you think? Would you
It
rather be
depends
a
on-
Nelson or a Kennedy, JB?
Whew, that's a good question. I'll get back to you at the end of the
Okay.
podcast. I'll think about
Okay.
that.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Yeah. So, but you did grow up in Los Angeles, right? So that puts you right there. I mean, I know you have an affinity for the '80s, and that puts you right there when you were coming of age, when all of that Sunset Strip stuff was going down, which was, in rock and roll, it was pretty much, they've always had a huge music scene in Los Angeles, but at that point in time, that was the spot.
I mean, it's hard to explain to people who weren't there. Like, and I sound so old saying that you had to be there, but it's so hard to describe the Sunset Strip because you had at the very beginning, and I'll mention the intersection, although non-local people will be like, "What's that?" But on Sunset and Doheny, you had a club called Gazzari's, which is now, I think, Jay-Z's One Oak, which is kind of weird because they're open. I think he just bought the building and they're never open. Like they rarely have events there. But in the 80s, you had, I think at first Van Halen was the house band. Well, they were in the late 70s because by the 80s, they were, already pretty big. But then Ratt was the house band. And then lesser known bands like Shark Island, who the singer of Shark Island is the guy who Axl Rose mimicked his moves. I always felt bad for that guy because I recently saw them in concert at the Whiskey. I saw Shark Islands playing in 2022. I want to see if Axl stole from this guy. And I swear to God, the second he hit the stage, I'm like, this is the guy Axl stole from, because he does the little snake dance and he does all these microphone flips. And then they, at the other end of the strip, you had a club called Coconut Teaser, which is now a very high-end nightclub. But back then you had bands like Guns N' Roses, punk bands like the Zeros, and anything in between was like an ant farm of horny people walking around. You had guys who looked like girls who looked like guys. And then one block below that on Santa Monica Boulevard, you had the Troubadour. So, and then you had the Comedy Store. So you could go see Motley Crue and Ratt or Shark Island, who were probably the most popular band on the strip in their heyday, which is crazy given what bands, overtook them later. And then you can go to the Comedy Store and see like Dice Clay and Sam Kinison and David Letterman. And so it was just an era I don't think you'll ever see again, because now you have, and this is where I sound really old, but back then there was no Netflix, there was no Instagram or MySpace or whatever. If you wanted to be entertained, you had to go out.
Yeah,
and people did.
Yeah, those are the days of being untethered, and you maybe have a day gig and you have to work, and to meet your friends, you would call and check your answer machine to see where everybody was. Or you just had your spots that you went and showed up and you knew there were going to be a bunch of people that you knew.
Yeah, I mean, basically Sunset Boulevard was the spot. It's like a 3 or 4 mile square radius of bands. And once again, this is pre-social media. So instead of a band saying, hey, come check out Poison at, the Whiskey, Poison had to actually go on Sunset and post flyers. And then a band like Warrant would put their flyers over Poison's flyers. And then Poison would circle back and go, hey, who are these guys putting their flyers over our flyers? So it was like the Bloods and the Crips minus the Bullets.
Right. So did you ever consider trying to be in a band back then?
Staples.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, Staples. I actually had my friend No, I have no musical ability to answer your question.
Well, that hasn't stopped a lot of people, though, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, that shouldn't have stopped me based on some of the bands that made it. But
Right.
I had my friend about 10, maybe 15 years ago. He drums for Slash now. His name's Brent Fitz. He's,
he played in, wasn't he in Gene's solo band for just a second? We had some friends that play with him.
Yeah. He's a very in-demand touring and session drummer. And he's like a musical savant. He can play keyboards, drums. He tried to teach me guitar when he was a unsuccessful musician. He worked at a place on Sunset called Johnny Guitars, which is now a pizza parlor. Because I think the guy who ran the Guitar Center, or Johnny Guitars, got arrested for embezzlement. But we won't get into that.
Turned into Johnny's Pizza.
Yeah. And Brent was like, Earl, come in. I'll teach you how to play guitar. You've got the rock star looks with the leather pants and all that. You'd kill it on stage. And maybe after about 3 lessons, he's like, dude, stick to comedy.
So speaking of comedy, were you a comedy fan as a kid? Like, how did you get into that? Clearly you're a music fan, but were you always into comedy as a youngster too?
Not necessarily stand-up, but I was a huge fan of the Dean Martin roast, which are so much better than the Comedy Central roast. Because, and that's not a slam on Comedy Central, because I still audition for their animation projects. So, but on like the Comedy Central roast, they just get a bunch of people, funny comics who don't really know the person they're roasting, and back in the Dean Martin era, they knew who they were roasting, and the jokes were, by today's standards, racist, homophobic, definitely crossed several lines. But back then it was okay because they knew the person, like they were friends. And I grew up not watching stand-up because stand-up really wasn't on TV a lot when I was a kid. It was just basically the Tonight Show, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with like Archie Bunker from All in the Family as not a role model in terms of stand-up, but because he was portraying a horrible racist. But I liked how he was saying the most awful things, but he was still likable. Like at the end of the day, the character was just a dumb idiot who didn't even realize he was racist. So that's how my humor is now. Like I say some pretty wacky things on stage, but people love me because, like last night I did a gig, very hoity-toity gig. It was for a dog foundation I work with. And the lady was like, hey, we want a comic to host. You'd be perfect for it. I'm like, I don't think I would. My humor is very dry and dark. And I was talking my way out of the gig because I love this. It's the LaBelle Foundation and the owner is Laura. And I'm like, Laura, I want you guys to make money tonight. I don't think I'm going to drive funds when people start hearing my dirty jokes. And she's like, you're just what we need. And it worked out because that crowd, it was 21 and over. They wanted dirty jokes. So they got them. But I've never really watched stand-up because I want to do it.
So how did you get into stand-up then? If you like just watching these, did you think about maybe I'm going to try and get on a TV show or something like that's the comedic route to take? Or did you discover stand-up at some point and go, well, maybe that's what I'll do? Like, at what point did you go stand-up? Yeah, I could try that.
What's funny, all my friends at the time, and this is the late 80s, early 90s, maybe even into the mid 90s, they were all managers and agents at like ICM, William Morris, companies that would later be 3 Arts. That's a big management company out here. They were like, Earl, get into stand-up. You're the funniest person we know. And they had like huge clients, like A-list comics. So that gave me the confidence to get in it. But then all my friends left the entertainment business to get into real estate. So I struggled for a while because I didn't have their help anymore. But it all worked out, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So growing up in Los Angeles and with the family name, I would imagine there were probably some odd circles or neighbors or something like that you've got to have a wealth of stories of stuff like that, being a native. Were you born in Los Angeles?
I was born in Bel Air, which, when you say Bel Air to people, they just think, oh, you're rich.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad bought a home in Bel Air in the mid 60s when Bel Air was known. It was just actually an almost lower income neighborhood. It was just a hillside with no homes. And then little by little homes were built there. And then there was the famous Bel Air fire in the mid 60s, which literally burnt down every home in Bel Air but ours.
Wow.
And then little by little in the 70s, O.J. Simpson lived there before he had his problems. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think Mick Jagger had, I don't know if he lived there, but he had a house there. Stallone, James Caan, the actor. So we just were lucky that we were lucky that a fire burned down everyone's home, but ours. So Elvis lived below us. I think that was the last home he had up until his death. So it
Below
was
you? You said below?
Yes. We lived basically at the top of a canyon. So about maybe 100 yards below us was Elvis's house. And I do have vivid memories of seeing him get out of like this insanely long limousine, like Cadillac limousine, and not really realizing the gravity of who he was. I think I was maybe 10 when he died, or maybe even younger, 9. He died in 77, I think. So, now I go, wow, that was pretty cool. Elvis was our neighbor. And then Harry Nielsen, I was up at his house
that's cool.
every day playing with his kids, which back then wasn't a big deal to me. But now I look back at Harry Nielsen's contributions to music, and basically he was the 5th Beatle. And so I didn't realize how lucky I was at the time.
Did you ever get to spend any quality time with the Juice before his problems allegedly came up?
Yeah, of course. Always allegedly with him. He threw me the football every now and then. He would go jogging. Everyone would jog by our house. So my dad and I and my brothers would be playing tackle football on cement, of course. And so one day OJ would be jogging by and he'd throw us the football. And then Stallone would be jogging by. And he was more important to me than Elvis because, I'd be like, that's Rocky. That's Rambo. So it definitely was. And then to see Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who a lot of people don't know who he is just because his heyday was in the late 70s and 80s. To see a 7'2" black man jogging in the streets of Bel Air with just dolphin shorts on is really probably my most memorable visual because he looked like an alien. He was just, I'd never seen someone that big before. So that was pretty neat to see him training on our street.
In YMCA shorts circa 1977. Those nice short ones, yeah.
Oh, I can't tell you how short these shorts were. There was not a lot left to the imagination.
So OJ threw him the football, and then Stallone came by and punched him in the face, and then Kareem dunked on him.
And then Gloria Vanderbilt was also, that wasn't a big deal to me, but I think that's Anderson Cooper's mom, I think. She was in Stallone's house before he was. So it was just an amazing rogue collection of celebrities and rich, Saudi princes would build these. I mean, our house looked like the Addams Family house compared to everyone else's, but it was an interesting way to grow up.
Was it a trip to go from having neighbors to the entire world burning down around you and then just going, hey, it's just us here. This is great, or this is awful?
I mean, I wasn't born yet when the fire hit, so
Okay.
I didn't, like most things we've talked about, I didn't realize till many, many years later, with the advent of Wikipedia and Google, like, oh, wow, that's why we lived in Bel Air. Not because we had the money, but just, it was like getting in on a IPO of a hot stock. We were first. And like, I grew up playing golf at Bel Air Country Club, which once again, back then, I didn't really realize how cool it was, but then to play golf with someone like, say, Mac Davis, who is a very, very, I guess he's more known as a country singer than an actor, but that was pretty cool because he was in one of my favorite sports movies of all time called North Dallas 40.
Yeah.
Which was like an expose on the NFL and drugs. And he played a loose interpretation of Don Meredith, who was a partying football player. So to get to be with someone like Mac Davis when you're 12 years old, I didn't appreciate it until now.
Yeah, Mac Davis used to have a golf tournament here in Nashville in the early 80s, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he was maybe one of the first crossover stars who, outside of, I guess Elvis maybe was the first who sang, acted, danced. He was pretty versatile, like Chris Christopherson as well, I guess. Was in that.
Jerry Reed.
Yeah, I love Jerry Reed. I mean, Smokey and the Bandit. It's like oddly enough, I have this weird love of trucker movies. One of my favorite movies of all time is Chris Christopherson in Convoy, which is which actually had some stand-up roots because the African-American actor in that was a very famous comic at the time by the name of Franklin Ajayi, who I even as a kid when I watched that movie, I'm like, this guy's pretty funny. But unfortunately for Mr. Ajayi, he picked the wrong time to be a black comic with Richard Pryor blowing up at the same time. It's like, especially in the 70s, maybe now you could have Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle. But back then, if Richard Pryor wasn't around, Franklin Ajayi would be talked about much more.
So what about trucker songs? Do you ever listen to Red Sovine and all that old shit? Because that stuff is hilarious.
I love C.W. McCall. Of course, he sang Convoy.
Right.
Then there's Boxcar Willie. I'm not a gigantic fan, just because of the, growing up in LA, you were almost forced to be a glam metal in the 80s.
Sure.
And with discos, even though I was way too young to go to discos, I actually, my very first apartment was on the grounds of one of the first discos in LA. It was a place called Osco's, which was the disco in that movie Donna Summer was in 79. I'm forgetting the name of it. But it was just funny that I actually ended up living basically in a disco for my first apartment.
So you mentioned you had friends that, like, when you were starting in the stand-up, you had friends in the business. Like, what was your first? How did you first get into it? Did you just start going out to open mics? Did you, work at the Comedy Store? How did that start?
A little bit of both. I mean, I started with open mics, and then I figured, and I look back now and I'm mortified that I thought this, but you don't know what you don't know. I went to the Comedy Store maybe a couple months into comedy, thinking I'll just get in here. It seems to be like the best club. Be like someone ice skating for 3 months, going, I think I'll try out for the Nashville Predators. So this will work. And the Comedy Store in the early 2000s was a very dark place. It was not the Comedy Store you see now with, like tonight, all 3 rooms are sold out. It was a very sparse crowd, and the humor was incredibly dark and aggressive. And I just wasn't ready for it. So I went back to open mics, and I was very loved in the LA comedy community because I could go into the wildest rooms, even early on in my comedy career, and tame them. because I had on leather pants and a hockey jersey. So the crowd instantly was like, what is this? And, I had a lot of bad shows in the early days, but I think it's because of those early days and playing like a black room where I was literally the only white guy, not just in the club, but on the block, playing a gay bar, being the only straight guy, not just in the room, but in the block. That was a great training to be able to do a gig like last night, which was, upper crust, rich white people looking at me going, make us laugh. And I'm like, I've done rooms in Compton. This is easy. So,
Right.
It's like Mr. T training in Rocky 3 in the basement. There's not too many gigs that faze me.
Right. Yeah. And I can imagine like that probably helps because I know, you work out at the Comedy Store a lot now. And there's got to be there's got to be those certain times where you got to be quick to grab an audience. Like if you're somebody gets a pop in and you got like the 1 a.m. set or whatever, and I don't know, Dave Chappelle or somebody comes through, and then you still got material to do after that. And I would imagine you got to grab the people quickly before they all completely bail because they've been there for a while. The big hot shot came through.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Dave Chappelle because that happened to me about maybe 2 months ago. I'm about to go on in the main room and it's pretty full. And I'm literally right behind the curtain about to hear my name. And Dave Chappelle walks up to me and goes, "Hey, Earl, can I go on?" Like I'm going to say no. And of course he walks out and, it's like Kiss hitting the stage. Mm-hmm. And, Dave usually does at least an hour, if not 2. So I start walking to my car, not mad, just, hey, you're going to get bumped for someone, Dave Chappelle's the guy to be bumped for.
Right.
And the manager comes running out to my car going, "You got to get back in there." I'm like, "Jen, he's going to do like 2 hours. I'm not waiting until 3 a.m. He's like, "No, he just got off stage. He just called your name." So I start frantically running like the ultimate warrior to the back of it's a wrestling reference for you kids. And I come upon his very large bodyguard. Now, this is before the attack at the Hollywood Bowl. And the bodyguard turns around like he's going to kick my ass. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm the next comic. I'm not a fan. I mean, I'm a fan." I was so stuttering. I'm like, "I'm a fan, but I'm not a fan right now. And he just called my name. My name's Earl Skakel." And the guy looks at me, and this guy is a refrigerator. He goes, "Don't ever come up upon me again like that, Earl." I'm like, "You got it, buddy." And I tapped his shoulder, and it was like tapping the side of the Empire State Building. I could run out there, and you got to understand, it's just what you said. Probably 400 people in the room. They all want to leave because they just saw the greatest comic of all time. So I said, I got to say something right now, or they're going to all leave. I'm like, "Guys, give me one joke. If you don't like the joke, we'll all leave together." They got a little bit of a laugh. And then I have this line I say when I'm following a famous comic. I said, "Guys, I know what you're thinking. Who the hell is this guy? We just saw Dave Chappelle. Well, now I know how the Chinese guy feels following the black guy in a gangbang. I'm just glad to be in the movie." And there wasn't a person who didn't laugh at that line in that room. And I did about 20 minutes, and it was magical. It was probably a highlight of my comedy career to say, not just that I followed Chappelle, but I did well. Because that's, I remember when I saw Kiss and Aerosmith, and, Aerosmith is a legendary band. But the night I saw them, they would alternate headlining roles, like Tuesday night be Kiss, and then, the next night be Aerosmith. And Kiss went on first the night I saw them. And, they're very hard to follow with the bombs and the explosions and the blood and the lasers. And although Aerosmith was good, they struggled following Kiss. So most comics would struggle following Chappelle because he's just the level of expectation is like, who are you? So you got to have the first line ready. And if you don't have a line ready, you will lose that crowd. And inside of 10 minutes, they will be gone.
When I was in California about a month ago now, and we went to the Comedy Store and we were hanging out in the back. I was with Ryan Sickler.
I love him.
Yeah, he's great. Shout out Ryan Sickler. And it was the day after Dave Chappelle was attacked on stage. And so he was at the Comedy Store, and we were hanging out in the back smoking weed, and Dave Chappelle came back there with his crew and everything. And
did you rush him?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I just sat.
I don't think you would mind. I don't think you would mind if you rushed him.
But he did lean down and introduce himself to us, and he's like, "Are y'all comedians?" And I just said, "I'm Raelyn," so he thinks I'm a comedian, But then I heard that he went up like 30 minutes later and was on until like 3 or 4 in the morning.
Oh yeah,
belly room.
Yeah. Which is why the night I had to follow him, I was leaving because, and he's certainly allowed to do 2-3 hours or whatever he does. But the night I followed him, he did maybe 10 minutes, which is in the 10 years I've known him, I've never seen him do less than an hour. So, because he's like watching Van Gogh paint. Like when he's up there, it's like a comedy class.
Yeah.
So,
well, clearly he only did 10 minutes because he
wanted to hear you.
Yeah, the Daddy Man was up next. He didn't want to, he knows where he stands in the pantheon of comics.
Well, I know where I stand, and it's a lot lower than where Dave stands. But.
Well, after that experience, and then you did pretty well following him, would you rather say that you opened for him or followed him?
I would say he opened for me that night. So I'm just kidding.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, some comics do that. They're on a lineup with Dave or someone very famous, and Dave went on at 10, and they went on at like 7 p.m. That's not opening for Dave.
Right.
So there's a lot of fudging on the credits in LA comedy.
I do that.
Yeah, bands do that all the time.
Yeah.
If you're playing a festival that's packed and you're playing at 3 in the afternoon and there's like 30,000 people.
We opened for
there.
Nelly. Remember when we
That's
opened
true.
for
We
Nelly?
opened for Nelly like 4 hours before he played, but you always take the picture with the built-in crowd behind you and post that out.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I've done that as well a few times.
We opened for Tim McGraw and Rascal Flatts, and there's
But it
some
was
others.
a little bit earlier than they played, but yeah, same
Who
deal.
were the people at that the big one, the Bourbon in Kentucky?
Okay, I can't remember.
I think it was
who
Tim McGraw again.
Maybe.
And, yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, you mentioned the Dean Martin roast. How did you get hooked up with Roast Battle?
Well, it's a fascinating story about how that show started. There used to be a really bad open mic on Tuesday nights at the Comedy Store. I mean, when I say bad, it was all comics, no crowd. And these were not good comics. They were open mic level comics, which is fine. I mean, we all start there, but I think once you elevate above that, it's hard to watch. It'd be like you guys watching beginning musicians. It might be fun for a minute, but then it's like, oh boy, they can't play basic chords. I got to go. And then one night, these two comics were arguing, and they were going to fist fight. And Brian Moses, I think he said something to I don't think he said battle, but he said, you guys can't fight, but why don't you slap each other, which is what they call in the hood when people rip on each other. And it was just maybe 5 people in the room, myself, Moses, the 2 guys fighting, and maybe one girl. She must have felt real comfortable. And, and then it went so well that the next week people didn't want to do stand-up. They were like, hey, can we do what Josh and Kenny did last week? And then that's how it started. I mean, it's crazy to see a show that got 3 seasons on TV and now multiple spin-off shows throughout the world literally started with 2 open mic comics wanting to fight. So I was in the early days of roast battle, that first, say, year and a half, the battles were horrible. Like, it was two open mic comics who didn't have a joke between them. So Moses and I were basically the pressure relief valve after a bad battle. You know, we would do shtick together. We were like a comedy team, and we just had great chemistry. And then the show got bigger and bigger, and literally every week it got bigger. And then Comedy Central got involved. And I think they said to Moses, hey, we like that guy in the corner who just yells out stuff, but we have a thing called sponsors, so we can't really have him say what he's saying. Can he battle? And I had never battled before, but we all had a feeling at that point that it was going to get on TV. And as a comic at that time with no TV exposure, I'm like, yeah, I'll battle. So they started putting me up against all the popular people on the show, and I beat them all. And, you know, I got on season 1 of the TV show, and then I would say I'm probably one of, if not the most popular battle on the TV show side of things. But they didn't have me back because I think they were mad I beat Jimmy Carr, who, you know, they wanted to have win. And I love Jimmy. He's like one of the biggest comics in the world. But I don't think beating him helped my long-term roast battle career.
So did you ever get notes from, were you allowed free reign with that stuff, or did you get stuff cut out? And when you were doing those things, how involved was the network when you were doing that?
Well, with me, they were very involved because I was a bit of a wild card. So like my first battle in Montreal, my second battle on TV, I was battling a super funny gay comic by the name of Tom Ballard. So all my jokes were gay related. Definitely couldn't have a battle with Tom in this day and age. I don't think I'd get past one joke, but they were all gay themed. And I remember one joke involved the word cum. I'll leave it at that. It just involved that word. And the network writes back to me, hey, instead of that, can you say semen? I'm like, sure. And so I said come anyway on TV. I was so nervous. I was like, yeah, whatever you guys need, I'll take care of it. And then I knew, because I was going to be one of the featured battlers because of how I did it with the leather pants and oiling up my body, looking like a pro wrestler, I knew they'd have to leave in all my jokes. So, you know, I did it with, I'm a big fan of pro wrestling.
Where'd that come from? Did you wrestle with your stepdad too?
Well, no, sounds like you have an interesting story.
we had your buddy Danish on last week, and a conversation took a strange turn with Raelyn wrestling with her stepdad. There's a whole, yeah.
Well, we might have to talk off air about that. I don't want to get you guys kicked off of Apple. I mean, it goes to how old I am, being 53. When I was a kid, you know, there was no internet. So I swear on my life, I thought wrestling was real. So I was fascinated by it, like with the characters, and, you know, my favorite character to this day, I'll see if I have, I thought I had it. Oh, here it is I have he was a wrestler by the name of Kamala.
Yeah.
And I think he got the character in Nashville by Jerry Lawler, where they had him play basically a wild African savage.
Yeah, totally.
And I remember as a child asking my dad how Vince McMahon got this savage over from Africa. And my dad looked at me like, I don't have the heart to tell you. He's not from Uganda. He's actually from Mississippi. But I just grew up such a fan of wrestling, and the bad guys usually were my favorite characters, like Rick Rude, who is basically what my roast battle character was. Just Rick Rude was a bad guy, but people loved him because he was so cartoonish and he had this beautiful body. And I'm not saying I'm Rick Rude, but I have a pretty good body. For 53, it's held up. So I would go out there like Rick Rude and call the audience fat and lazy and ugly. And, I'd call Jeff Ross all those things too. And the people were like, this guy's insane. Because it's not in my character to call someone fat or a whore, or, hey, your nose is so big that. So I had to do it as a character, or else I probably couldn't have done it.
Yeah, and I was a kid watching wrestling too, and here, it was still regional. It's kind of before Vince took over everything. So we had the Memphis wrestling out there with Paul Orndorff and Jerry the King Lawler and all those guys. It was just basically really low budget, but fantastic. And then, once it took over, I was a Piper guy myself. Roddy Piper was my guy.
Sounds like y'all are pussies, though, because I was the one actually wrestling with my stepdad while y'all are just watching these people do it.
Hey, I wrestled in high school.
Oh, you did?
In junior high, yeah.
Oh, well.
I mean,
not even to anybody related.
I was lucky enough to host Piper's podcast with him toward the end of his life, and it was like being in the room with Superman. Like, he was like the first bad guy of WrestleMania, so he was pretty significant in the world of wrestling. And I went to wrestling last week at the Forum. I mean, now of course it's not real. Like when someone's billed as being from the Sudan. They're from Canada, but it's like a guy soap opera. I still enjoy watching it
completely. And they just would, especially through the late 80s and early 90s, just rip out of the headlines and like, we don't like Iran because we're at war with them, so we're going to bring in a guy and dress him up and make and he just comes in, trashing the USA and all that. It's fantastic stuff. Just super heel. Iron Sheik would just walk in.
So right now it'd be Russian stuff.
Yeah, probably Russian. They're probably, or Earl could probably.
They would have like a Putin type bad guy who would come to the ring in a suit, in a Russian accent. But the guy in reality would probably be from Minnesota. Like one of my favorite bad guys in the mid 80s, early 90s was this gigantic bald guy named Nikita Koloff.
Yep.
And he was one of the original choices to play Drago in Rocky IV, but he was too big next to Stallone, so he lost out on the job. He's actually from Minnesota. And if you look up, I don't like to steer people to YouTube, but if you look up Nikita Koloff interviews, it's the strangest thing now to hear him speak in his Minnesota accent. When I only grew up listening to him speak in that evil Russian, Dark Lord, Darth Vader type accent. He's got like a farm boy, accent.
So you also you've done movies too. Do you enjoy doing those? Is it just something to do? How is that compared to doing stand up? Because I would assume you like doing stand up.
Why would you do it if you didn't like it?
Well, I mean, you might not love it. You might.
Clearly, you like doing them. Tell us about that.
Well, I only like doing them because I know it will increase my stand-up gigs. Stand-up's my love. It's what I'm best at. So I'll do any TV, movie. I mean, I do like doing cartoons because it's like combining, just in voiceover work, you're hired based on just really the tone of your voice. It's got nothing necessarily to do with your talent to be funny or a good actor. If they're looking for a deep voice and you have a deep voice, you get the gig. So I enjoy all forms of the entertainment world because, ultimately it will, increase my ability to play in front of larger crowds, at the end of the day, which is what we all want as musicians, comics. The more people you can get in front of, the better off you'll be long term. So, I've been treated very well on 90% of the projects I've worked on. So I'm lucky.
Nice. Yeah. And we've talked to a lot of comics. When you were first starting out, a lot of people, there's somebody in the class above them that really helped them out or took them under their wing, or a few people. Did you have anybody like that when you were coming up, through there and kind of trying to get your name out there?
No, I mean, Rob Schneider, when I was about 9 years in, I'm not going to lie and say I was going to quit, but I didn't have a lot of success 9 years into my career. I don't even want to say that it was a career because that wouldn't that would imply I was making money. But Rob showed me the good side of Hollywood, and he was really the first person to make phone calls for me. And, you know, like when I auditioned the very first time for Just for Laughs, which is like the Super Bowl of comedy, you know, he just walked right into the room and says, "Who do I got to talk to?" I'm like, "Well, there's another comic on right now, but that's the blonde girl holding the camera." And he just walked right up to her in front of someone else's audition. He's like, "Hey, you got to put my guy on the festival. He's the guy." And of course I didn't get it, but like, yeah. But Rob was really the first person to like put me in front of, you know, 2,000 people at a time. And I'm very appreciative of Deuce Bigelow and all he did for me.
Right.
Yeah, I saw him at Zany's not too long ago, just a couple months ago here in Nashville, and it was phenomenal. The show I saw before that, like a week or just a few days before, was terrible. I won't even mention who it was. So his was so great that I was like, well, you know, he could have done bad, and I would have thought it was great from the one I saw before. But he was really good, and it was long. It was even like 2 hours or something.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's the hardest working comic I've ever seen. Like, we would do a theater, say in New Mexico, and you know, I think the Rio Grande Theater, and I just remember because backstage I saw all these autographed pictures of bands who would play there, like Slash and you know, not the Killers, but some pretty big bands. So I was like, wow, I get to be on that same stage. It's pretty neat. And we do a theater like that, and he would go right up to his hotel room and start writing jokes. Like he just, and I worked really hard, and he made me realize I got to work harder. Like if Deuce Bigelow is going up to his hotel room to work on his jokes, then I better go to my room and try something.
Yeah.
Right. Have you ever opened for, I know your love of music, and I know you're buddies with a lot of those bands now. Have you ever opened for any of them, like done comedy before a rock show? Because that can be dicey.
Well, yes and no. I once had to open up for Motorhead because, yeah, it's as bad as it sounds. The guitar player at the time, Phil Campbell, he was obsessed with me. He was a very strange guy, very nice guy, but he's like, "I'm not going on stage, Earl, till you do 10 minutes of comedy." And literally, he was serious. They had got inducted, I think, into the Guitar Center Walk of Fame, which is a big deal in LA. And they had a celebration concert at the Whiskey that night. And Phil was just in one of those moods where he told Lemmy and Mickey, "I want to hear Earl do stand-up." And Lemmy shot me a look of, "You better get up there and do stand-up." And so I took one foot on stage, and I don't think I can say this word on your podcast.
Yes,
Yes, you can.
Okay, well, this is someone from the crowd. This is what they said.
You're quoting, just everybody listening. This is a quote from the crowd.
And I start to, "Hey guys, Phil wanted me to do 10 minutes of stand-up. I know you don't want to hear it. I don't want to do it." And someone yelled, "Get off the stage, faggot." And, I don't think Phil, luckily, was paying attention. So I'm like, "Ladies and gentlemen, Motorhead."
One of the best sets ever.
I mean, Phil didn't know that. He actually said "good job." So I'd like to thank his drug dealer that night for.
Yeah.
And then I once, 2 other music gigs stand out. I had to host at the El Rey Theater, which is a pretty big theater in Los Angeles. And I don't know how I got this gig, but it was a Democratic fundraiser. And Katie Lang was the big act. And I had to do stand-up before Katie Lang. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I bombed for 15 minutes. It was, I don't know how much the El Rey Theater holds. I'll guess 1,000 or so people. I didn't get one laugh. And no, I'm not. I wish I could lie and say I did okay. And Katie Lang just puts her arms around me before she went on as a tough crowd kid. Yeah, no, I mean, it was, but those are the gigs you kind of can laugh at now. And I mean, I can't say I'm glad it happened, but, you know, I look back and, you know, because I've had a lot of good gigs, luckily, since then, that I can laugh at them now and, just go, it's part of the process.
Well, we were talking to Doug Stanhope about that same thing, and he's like, well, you don't ever, the ones you remember are the bombs.
Yeah.
Those are the funnest ones. Those are the stories. So like, you only have one best gig, and they all get, and it's like, nobody wants to hear the story like, I got up there and killed. It's like the ones you really remember and the ones everybody gets together and loves, the stories to be told are the bad gigs.
Oh yeah. I mean, I opened up for Stephen Pearcy, the singer from Ratt. Ratt's probably my favorite band. So me and Stephen have become odd friends through various back channels, and he's come to my house to do my podcast, which is completely surreal for me to have one of my favorite singers on my couch. And he called me up one night and said, "Hey, I'm playing the Whiskey. Come do stand up." And it was just, just surreal to do stand up before the guy who sang Round and Round.
And requested you. That's got to feel good.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great guy. I mean, I'd heard before I met him that, he can be a little prickly. He's been nothing but nice to me. So that's made me even a bigger fan.
I don't know the band Ratt. When were they?
You probably heard, it's that same era, and
yeah.
you've heard songs.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's good to know that there's still some left in Los Angeles, because most of those guys have moved to Nashville at this point.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of them. I mean, I think Vinnie Vincent is in Nashville somewhere.
Yeah.
He was just here this weekend playing at Creature Fest or
Now,
something.
though,
Yeah.
right? Isn't
Huh?
it she?
No, it's not a she.
Oh.
That's the joke. Yeah. He
Okay.
hasn't transitioned.
Okay.
But he actually made a gig.
Well, he dresses like a woman, though. No?
Yeah.
That?
Well, I mean, they all kind of did.
Are we canceled? Let's
one
just
point.
move on. I don't even know.
But yeah,
No, I mean, he dresses in like these Hillary Clinton pantsuits now. So I actually pitched a documentary about him to Netflix because I was one of the guys who, when he left Kiss, he formed his own band. And a couple years after he got kicked out of his own band, he had a box set that he shipped out to people. And I remember I got mine. It came in a miniature pink Flying V guitar type presentation, because that's what he's famous for.
Yeah.
And I remember getting the box set, and I was going, man, this seems pretty light. I don't hear anything going on inside this box, and there was nothing in the box. So I pitched Netflix an idea, because he's a recluse. I don't know if there's ever been a figure in the rock and roll community like him. He's almost got this Howard Hughes type. He just was in Kiss in his own band and then disappeared.
and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like he lived out in Hendersonville here, and they found a bunch of dead cats in a freezer or some weird story like that, like 5 or 6, maybe longer than that. I remember reading it here
in
locally.
his freezer?
Yeah. I mean, like, not that he was killing them, but maybe they died and he was, I don't know. He's a weird dude.
No, they found dogs in Tupperware containers because he was, listen, I love my dogs. I've had a lot of dogs. I have the last 4 dogs I've had. Their ashes are right by my bed. So I get being attached to your animals, but he didn't have them cremated. He just kept them in Tupperware containers. And, his first wife, this is when I think he lived in Connecticut, was, I guess, ended up being an escort. She was killed. So he's got this fascinating career. He wrote jingles for Happy Days before he was in Kiss. So I pitched Netflix this idea, and I probably shouldn't say the idea, but, at this point, why not? That the documentary starts with me on my couch with the empty box set. And then the next scene is me knocking on his door in Nashville going, "Where are my cassettes, motherfucker?" And then we get into, because no one's ever heard his side of the story.
Nope.
Because he's completely insane. Like I had one of his representatives, I have a podcast, who doesn't? say, hey, Vinny would love to do your podcast. I'm like, great. Because I've had like the drummer from Cinderella and the guitar player from Warrant, a lot of 80s guys on. So I'm assuming he heard of it through that way. And he's like, he'll do it for $25,000.
Oh my God.
And he's being completely serious. I'm like, and you guys know, but no one pays for Rogan might, but like no one pays their podcast guests. It's just, you do it for the promotion of, like, hopefully after this, maybe Stanhope fans will listen to this and go, oh, that guy's pretty funny too. I'm like, I don't know, we'll listen to his podcast or whatever. So needless to say, I did not give Vinnie Vincent $25,000 to be on my podcast.
Yeah, we had one comedian who asked us for money when I asked.
Oh, I bet I know them.
You know them. They're pretty big.
But that's like, that's why he is where he's at, doing, KISS conventions in his almost near 70s. I would have gone to Nashville to meet him because
I met him.
What was it like?
It's just like a man dressed up like a woman. He was just standing there, and everyone, or she, and there was a big long line.
It's still a he.
Him.
He hasn't transitioned.
Are you sure?
I'm positive.
Like, if you were dressed like a woman, wouldn't you want people to call you that?
I don't think maybe he thinks it's like one of those old man jumpsuits, the pantsuits.
No, he was wearing a skirt. He was literally wearing a dress when I met him.
Uh-oh.
And there was just a big long line of people to meet him, so, but yeah, I was there with some people who already knew Gene and everything, so we were able to, scooch in and meet. But it wasn't that big of a deal to me, you guys, honestly, because, KISS isn't that big of a deal to me.
I got you. That's heresy, but anyway.
But he's so talented. Like, I realize the statement I'm about to say is music fans are going to be like, you're insane to even say that. But he has Van Halen-like ability. If you listen to some of his non-metal songs and the albums he's played on where it wasn't just, a million notes a second, it's like, wow, this guy's a great guitar player.
Yeah, in his prime, he was up there with Yngwie and all those guys that, spoken in the same breath back before he went crazy. And
if you listen to him even in the Dan Hartman band, which most people are like, who the hell is Dan Hartman? But he sang that song, I Can Dream About You, which was, in what was the movie? It was in that movie Streets of Fire, which was a complete bomb, but that song was still played on radio to this day. And it was done by I guess you'd call him an A&R type artist, Dan Hartman. And Vinny was in that band where he's just with the G.E. Smith from Hall & Oates band. And like, G.E. Smith is like an amazing guitar player, and Vinny held his own. So I think most people want to meet Vinny or just want to see what he's up to now because he's such an enigma. He's the only other guitar player I think that I can even say that's even remotely in that category is Jakey Lee, who was in Ozzy's band in the mid 80s, formed his own band, which was a really good band called Badlands, kind of a blues rock, and then just disappeared for 25 years. Literally just moved to Vegas and worked on his cars. And so I think it's like, in my case, it's just, I hate seeing people with that kind of talent just I think in Jake's case, the industry chewed him up.
Yeah, probably. Because that Ozzy gig had to be weird, just stepping right in with no practice and trying to cover for Randy Rhoads.
Yeah, you step in. The guy I feel really impressed with is Brad Gillis from Night Range.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was the guy, he had, I think, 3 days to learn all the Sabbath and Ozzy solo songs because they had tried out Bernie Torme. I might be there was one other guitar player after Randy Rhoads died where they just forced Ozzy on the road with this. He was a great guitar player, but he was like a hippie. Like he came out there with Ozzy with like water moccasins on. And and like, fringed, jackets that you'd see like Steven Seagal wear in a cowboy movie. And I'm pretty sure Sharon was like, hey, he's a great guitar player, but we need some guy in leather pants. And then Brad Gillis got the gig, and then Jakey Lee got it. And I just think Jake, he was with Ozzy on Bark of the Moon and The Ultimate Sin. And, he was saving Ozzy's career at that point, basically writing the albums while Ozzy was off in rehab. And I think he was like, hey, I want to get paid more. Or it's kind of like Vinny and Kiss. Vinny, as crazy as he is, he saved Kiss. Because, I don't think Ace could have kept up with the Yngwies and the DeMartinis.
Not a chance.
So I think Vinny and Jake have a lot of interesting parallels of just being so burnt by the industry, they lost their minds.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, so first of all, what's your go-to music that you listen to now when you're going to listen to music? Is it still Kiss, Village People?
It's Kiss, Ratt. I am obsessed with this boy band that should have been bigger. They're called the Click Five. I remember about 2005, I used to do a Sunday night radio show. It was done at like Sundays at midnight. It was the #1 morning show in Australia. So that's why we had to do it at midnight at the Warner Brothers building in Burbank. And I remember driving one night, and there was this they were the whole side of the building. It was the Click Five, Greetings from Emery House, which was the name of the album. And I asked the DJ, like, who's the Click Five? And he played me a song they did called Just the Girl. And I can only describe the Click Five as being like the Backstreet Boys meets the Cars, which ironically enough, they were from Boston, like the Cars. And they all graduated from the Berklee Music Institute. So they play their own instruments. And they did the Beatles thing with at least early on in their career of dressing up the same in suits and the same haircuts. And they put out about 3 albums. And so I have it. They're my guilty pleasure. But 80s metal, Poison, Def Leppard, the Cars. I love the Cars. I even love the New Cars, which was when Todd Rundgren sang in them for a minute.
Yep.
And it's funny, I saw Todd Rundgren on my street one day. And how the New Cars came about was it was Elliot Easton, the guitar player from the Cars, and Greg Hawkes, the keyboard player. They wanted to start touring again. And they had asked Rick Ocasek, obviously, let's get the band back together. And I think Rick Ocasek made so much money producing Weezer and other bands. He's like, I don't know what he said, but I'm sure it was like, I'm not doing the road. I'm 60. I'm good.
Stay home and make love to my model wife.
Yes. And the drummer from the Cars, David Robinson, he was a successful restaurateur. And I'm sure he was like, I make money with my clubs. I'm 60. I'm good. You guys can tour, but you can't call it the Cars. You have to call it the New Cars. And so they got Todd Rundgren to sing. And Kasim Sultan on bass. And one of my favorite drummers of all time, Prairie Prince from the Tubes.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like a great kind of potpourri of, an updated version of the Cars. And I saw Todd Rundgren. I think he was lost on my street one day because I live in a very gay part of town. And but it's very central to Hollywood. So I love it. And I'm like, are you lost, Mr. Rundgren? He's like, I'm looking for Beverly Hills. I'm like, oh, dude, it's not walkable. Get in your car and drive west. And before you go, I just have to tell you, I loved you in the New Cars. And he just looked at me and was like, son, you were about the only one. So they did a small tour and album that, didn't do very well, but he was like the perfect combination of voices from Rick Ocasek and Benjamin Orr, the deceased bass player. It was like the best of both worlds. And he's brilliant. He's a musical genius. So
For sure. It's not bad when you can rope Todd Rundgren into filling in for your lead singer.
No, and his bass player, Kasim, like I know him, he's always with Todd. So he's a musical, even though I'm a huge Benjamin Orr fan, the original bass player. If you're going to replace him with you got to replace him with someone. But, he's the guy you would replace him with. And I love the Tubes. So to see Prairie Prince drum, it was, it wasn't the Cars, but it was pretty good.
Okay, so before we let you go, what's the first time you remember hearing about my grandpa? And do you have any fun Papa Willie stories? My grandpa's Willie Nelson, in case you know.
Oh, of course. Well, it's funny. And this is going to sound crazy to you because when I met Dice Clay, and I promise this weaves into Willie Nelson. Most people, I'm embarrassed to say how I love your grandpa. When I met Dice Clay, I'm like, dude, when I first saw you at the Wiltern, he was like my first big comedy concert. And I always respected Dice Clay a lot because he blew up with no social media. So like when Dane Cook was big, and I'm not knocking Dane Cook, he had the value of MySpace and Napster. Dice had word of mouth, and that's it.
Yeah, because he wasn't on TV, that's for sure.
Well, he was on TV as an actor, which is when we became friends, which blows me away that I'm friends with one of my favorite comics. And you asked me earlier who was a comedy mentor to me. I would say Dice is now, just because I've gotten to know him. I said, dude, when I first became a fan of yours, it wasn't as a comic. And he looked at me like, fuck you, man. I'm like, no. I became a fan of yours because of your acting. And that's how I became a fan of your grandpa. Obviously, in the 70s and 80s, I had heard of Willie Nelson, but my first exposure to him was in the 1980 movie Thief, which is...
What did he do in that movie? I have no idea.
He played a bad guy. I think he was a jewel thief. And it's a very famous movie. We spoke about James Caan earlier, my neighbor. It's a movie about a safecracker who gets called back into business for one last big job. And I think Willie Nelson was his mentor in the movie. And so that was my first really, like I'd heard his songs in the 70s, but I really, if it wasn't Kiss, I didn't really listen to it in the 70s.
Yeah.
Or maybe that one song, Black Superman, which was a huge song. I forget who sings it. I think it was a Jamaican artist, Johnny something. It was a famous song in the 70s radio. And of course, More Than a Feeling. That song was on the air, every 10 minutes. And then one of my favorite TV shows, probably my favorite TV show, is Miami Vice. And of course, your grandpa was in one of my favorite episodes. So like Dice Clay, as insane as this sounds, because your grandpa is a musical, beyond a musical legend. Like there's legends, and then there's that
icon.
There's legends, icons, and then a level above icon. That's what your grandpa is. Like it's almost insulting to call him an icon. Like he just supersedes everyone else before him. But I liked him first as an actor, which is insane to say to,
yeah,
his granddaughter. But
I don't know. We've had some people that say their first thing was seeing him on the Muppets. So the same deal. They liked his acting before they liked his singing.
Well, in the 70s and 80s, I think people rarely did one thing. Like now, someone like, say, Billie Eilish or Miley Cyrus, or, that category of Pink, who I love Pink because she's
me too.
More aggressive, I guess you'd call it.
Raspy.
Yeah.
Well, I just like, her first video, I'm not going to sing the lyrics, but it was her manager, L.A. Hardy.
Yeah.
L.A. told
me
you'll be a pop star. All you have
to change
everything you are. And they cut to her on a couch with like this unkempt, curly hair. And she was basically saying, I'm not going to get a boob job. I'm not going to pose in bra and underwear. This is who I am. So that's why I like Pink, because she's a little more, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but
Gnarly.
Yeah.
yeah, she's just like a cool chick. Like Pink is someone you go out and have a beer with.
Yeah.
If her husband gave you permission. But like I don't believe she acts, and the artists of today, like maybe Harry Styles he's probably bringing that, like what your grandpa did of acting, singing.
Yeah. He wears dresses too, and we're supposed to call him he.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
He, she, they. I don't know what the hell to call anyone these days.
Right. But if this were the late 80s, all those people would have been on the Love Boat, at least. They would all done a turn on some kind of TV show.
Yeah.
Oh, and Harry Styles would have been on Match Game.
Yes.
He would have been on, $25,000 Pyramid.
Hollywood Squares.
I mean, but it was such a different era, and what, like one of my first celebrities I was attracted to, and I don't mean sexually, but like just like, who is this person, was that African-American guy, Nipsey Russell.
Oh, yeah.
But it was like, I still to this day could not tell you what Nipsey Russell is famous for. I don't know if he was, but like, well, he was just like the go-to black guy to be on any panel.
Okay.
He's very funny, so I'll assume he was a comic, but I don't think he was.
Yeah, didn't he do like rhymes or limericks or something? Always had some kind of rhyme he would do on those shows.
A stitch in time is, and then he'd have some funny like follow-up. But there were so many people like that in the 70s that, you were like, why is this person famous?
Yeah. Nipsey was like a poor man Sammy Davis Jr.
Okay.
Yeah, but at least with Sammy Davis, like
Sammy was a badass drummer, singer. Sammy did it all. He's one of my favorites.
Oh, I mean, that's why every time I'm on the main room at the Comedy Store, which is the #1 stage in the country, it's like the Grand Ole Opry for comics, I guess would be the only musical equivalence. That's the stage he sang on for the very first time after he lost his eye.
Wow.
So that's why the Comedy Store has such a history, because it was a nightclub before it was the Comedy Store. So it's where like Sinatra would go and sing. And so it still blows me away. Even this week when I hit that stage, hopefully we get our schedule within the hour. So I'm not sure when I'm playing there, but that I'm on the same stage. And literally they haven't changed it in terms of the flooring that Sammy Davis and Frank Sinatra were on. I mean, it's mind-blowing, the history that is in that building.
Yeah, that's badass.
Yeah. Well, Earl, thank you for doing this podcast with us.
Yeah, man, this was great.
This was great.
Oh, thank you. I hope to meet you guys in person.
Yeah, come to Nashville.
I've done the podcast comedy festival they had. I think it's called Rockin' Pod.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great. My friend snuck me into the Predators locker room, and
wow.
I've never come so close to stealing in my life, because all the players' equipment was hanging, hundreds of sticks and gloves and game-worn jerseys. And like, I'm a hockey fan, so like to put me, and the guy just said, you can be in here by yourself, just don't steal anything. And I was like, man, no one's going to know if I just take one stick. I mean, but I love Nashville. I was blown away by the music there. Even though I'm a metalhead and like boy bands and stuff like that, I'll just never forget walking the streets and seeing like these amazing blues bands playing in the parking lot of like a Subway. And like, there was like music everywhere. So,
yeah,
we are lousy with musicians in Nashville. There's a everywhere.
Stage in the Taco Bell downtown.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean,
no, there really is. On Broadway, they put a stage in the Taco Bell.
I want to do a video there, a music video.
Do you guys ever come to LA?
Well, I was just there. When was it? It was about a month ago. Whenever Chappelle got attacked, that's when I was.
Okay.
We were out there pre-pandemic.
And then we were out there last July too. We were doing podcasts and stuff, and we were going to play the Hotel Cafe, but it got canceled.
Right. Yeah,
because of the pandemic.
But next time we are out there, we're going to look you up.
Yeah, we'll look you up. And we'll have, do you drink beer? We'll have beers together if you drink beer. I'm
never had
not
a.
pink or anything, but
No, you're cool though. I can tell you guys are both cool. I've never had a drink in my life, and I'm 53. So we'll have to. You guys can drink,
Smoke
and I'll
weed.
have an energy drink. I've never had weed, but I'm around it so much. I get the secondhand high.
That's an impressive run.
Yeah.
53 years.
Are you on pills, meth, heroin, cocaine? What is your
I'm
vice?
energy drinks. I sometimes I wish I did cocaine because I know that what is in energy drinks is going to blow my heart up one day.
Yeah.
But I figure if that's the worst thing I put in my body, I'll live.
Yeah, you're doing all right.
All right. Well,
a lot
be
of my
careful in those energy.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm a good guy to go out with because I never get tired.
Oh yeah, and you can drive.
Yeah.
Can you?
No,
Okay.
100%. That's why I went to some of the wackiest parties in the 80s that normally I never would have been invited to, but all my industry friends were like, Earl, we're all cheating on our wives and girlfriends. So if there's any trouble, because I was a pretty big guy back then, muscle wise, you can be our muscle and you can be the sober driver and you can get the fat friend at the end of the night. I'm like, okay, cool.
Perfect.
There weren't any energy drinks at that time though. That seems like a recent thing, right?
No, there was. People don't remember the first energy drink was this thing called Jolt Cola.
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah, Jolt.
It was like 3 times the caffeine or whatever. They advertised it that way.
It was 3 to 4 times the caffeine of Coke, which I think I don't want to turn this into a science show, but I think in a can of Coke you get, I'll guess 80 milligrams of caffeine, which is a nice buzz. But to have, let's say 240 to 300 milligrams of caffeine, that's a little over the top for that time frame.
Yeah.
For sure. And they didn't, I guess it's not still around. I do remember Jolt Cola, and their advertising was like, screw all these healthy drinks, diet drinks. We're putting everything in this
Extra.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, it is still around. I play hockey in this really random area of California called Garden Grove, which is Orange County. And there's a liquor store right across the street from the rink that still carries Jolt Cola. And I had one the other night. I hadn't had a Jolt Cola in 25 years. I just want to see what it does to me. And I'm telling you right now, I felt like Keith Richards at Altamont. I don't know what's in Jolt Cola, but it's more than caffeine. I don't know if they put psychedelics in it, but if you're looking for a natural buzz, try Jolt Cola if you can find it.
Maybe it's because it's been sitting in that can since 1995 and they just pulled it out and it's fermented or something.
It's like wine. They've aged it for 20 years. But
It was your first alcoholic.
Thank you guys. You guys have been. I hope to meet you in person soon, and let me know when this comes out. I'll get the Earl of Maniacs into it.
Yeah.
We'll do it, man. Thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, guys, have a good day.
All right, you too.
Bye. Earl Skakel is my favorite comedian. Hey, Kennedy or Nelson?
Kennedy or Nelson? I'm gonna stick with Bright. I think my lineage is cooler than both of them.
But if you had to, would you rather?
See, the thing is I
or
don't have
Nelson?
to. Enjoy your groceries.
Don't be an asshole.
I know your mama's name.
Enjoy your cigarette.
What is this?
I don't know.